Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is my wrap up of everything I read in the month of June. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and in this video we're going to be looking at all of the books that I read and DNF'd in the month of June, and also having an update on the Giant TBR numbers. Now, the end of June is my birthday, so yeah, the numbers might look interesting for this month, but we will see. So more on that at the end of the video, as always. But first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my stats for the month. Then we'll go into the books, which I will talk about in order from the DNFs, then through the rest of the books in sort of order of preference, from what I enjoyed least to most, ending up with favourites of the month, of course. And then we will get that update on the Giant TBR. June was a bit of a slow month reading wise. I think this was because there were a few busy times in the month where I didn't really get as much read as I normally would. I only read a small amount of audiobooks because I read a very long one, and there were probably more books in June that I thought I would finish and didn't end up finishing because I went away at the end of the month and just didn't get as much reading done. So I did read a grand total of 10 books in the month of June, and one of those was an audio. I did read one of the physical books as like a combination of audio and physical, and I haven't counted that one as audio. According to Storygraph, that was a grand total of 3,483 pages. 60% of my books this month, which was something that was different, were 300 to 499 pages, and that is generally longer than my average, I would say. Previous months I've definitely read quite a few that have come in at under 300, so that was interesting. In my sort of Storygraph graph, mystery had gone up, literary had gone down from past months. So in terms of how the books that I read broke down, 4 of the books were library books. One of the books was a book within an omnibus collection, so it doesn't come off the Giant TBR yet. I read 4 from the Giant TBR and I DNF'd 2 from the Giant TBR. So first of all, I wanted to quickly say that I still have 3 books on the go from June that I will be carrying on with into July. The first one is The Martian by Andy Weir. I think I'm actually quite close to the end of this now. I'm listening to it on audio and I think I might have about 4 hours left. Really enjoying it, but I didn't get much time for audio at the end of the month, so that will likely be finished very soon. And I had 2 physical books that I'm carrying on into July. Unfortunately, one of them is The Dance Tree by Kieran Millward Hargrave, which is the book for my own book club, FOMO Book Club. Nothing wrong with the book, just reading it quite slowly, and I haven't had a chance to read it much over the past few days, so I am not that far into this, but hoping very much to finish it before the weekend and our live show. Well, I definitely will finish it before the live show, but hopefully the live show will be at the weekend if we've all finished the book. The other one that I'm carrying on is Missing You by Harlan Coben. This was one of the books I showed on my community tab as a book that I hoped to read in memory of Janelle. Janelle had a wonderful channel, Too Fond of Books, and recently passed away, and I was extremely sad about that. I had done 3 buddy reads with Janelle, one that I unfortunately DNF'd, but one of the ones we really enjoyed reading together was The Woods by Harlan Coben, and I always loved talking to Janelle about books. She was absolutely full of knowledge, especially when it came to crime and mystery, but not limited to crime and mystery. And yeah, I just feel so lucky that I did get to do some buddy reads with Janelle, because she was wonderful to talk to about books. And yeah, I did want to get quite a few books read in memory of Janelle for the Janelle-a-thon that was kindly set up by some other booktubers. But unfortunately, I haven't had much reading time over that week. So the one book that I did start and haven't yet finished is Missing You by Harlan Coben. I'm enjoying this. I am about halfway through on that one now. And all of the other books that I did show in that picture, when I read those books, I definitely will get to them. And when I read them, it will be in memory of Janelle, but I just didn't manage to read them within the week for the Janelle-a-thon. So yeah, I'm actually not enjoying this one as much as the Harlan Coben that I read with Janelle, but that's okay because we really enjoyed that one. Yeah, so carrying that one on into July as well, and I'll also finish off the rest of that TBR that I showed on my community tab. Yeah, some Agatha Christie on there, and I'm going to carry on looking for the book The Man in the Brown Suit because I don't have a copy of that Agatha Christie book, but it really reminds me of Janelle and our time together at Christie Fest. So yeah, I am going to hope to find a copy of that to read as well. But yes, back on to the June wrap-up of the books that I read. Actually, first of all, starting with two books that I didn't read, the DNFs. So I think partly my amount of books read is down in the month of June because not only did I probably not have as much reading time, I also DNF'd 2 books, which is unusual for me. I had previously only DNF'd 2 books all year. So both of these were actually off my own giant TBR. Both of these, I'm sorry to say, were also on my 23 crime and thriller books that I wanted to read in 2023, but I sadly will not be reading them, but I have attempted them. Both of them I was really sad about and disappointed to DNF because I really wanted to like both of them. The first one is Flesh and Blood by Caroline Mitchell. Now I've had this on my shelf since I won this book in a giveaway on Twitter held by the author. Extra sad to not want to carry on reading it because Caroline Mitchell had signed this book to me, so yeah, very unfortunate. So yes, I think that part of the problem for me with this book was it's quite a way into a series. So it's a series about D.I. Amy Winter. It's possible that if I'd have read the earlier books in this series, I would have already been into these characters and wanted to carry on and finish it. I hadn't. It was my first book that I've tried from this series, and I think that that counted against it a little bit. I did read 112 pages and unfortunately this didn't begin to grip me. Even now, like nearly a month on, I'm not that fussed that I never found out the solution to this mystery because the mystery didn't really hook me in as much as I feel like it should have done. It sounded great on the blurb, but I was unfortunately just a bit disappointed. I wasn't too invested in any of the characters that had been set up in this book. Unfortunately, I think this book is not for me. I think a lot of people would like this series. I think if you are into your sort of police procedural crime, this could be a book for you, but yeah, I do like police procedural crime generally, but I just couldn't get into this one. Do let me know if you've read earlier books in the series and you think that I should go back to some of those and try those instead. That was a shame that that one was DNF'd. The other one that was a shame to DNF, because this is part of a series I'd been reading for a long time. I think this might be the 12th book in the Kay Scarpetta series. I've already made a video talking all about my feelings on this book series and why I DNF'd this book and why I'm DNFing the whole series. So if you want to know more about this book and why I couldn't get on board with it, then do check out that video. I got up to about page 226 of this, and it's quite a chunky book. Just did not care enough about any aspect of this to carry on. In this book, the Kay Scarpetta series changes from first person to third person, and it almost goes way too far the other way with different perspectives because there were so many, and I felt like none of them were a character I was actually interested in. I didn't want to carry on with it. It was getting me a bit slumpy about my reading. I wanted to move on and try other books that I thought I would like more. That's the 2 DNFs. Next we go on to books that I thought were good. They were good, but they were not favourites or anything. So I'm going to start off this month not with Aurora Teagarden, with Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I was buddy reading this with the lovely Ange from Ange's Book Chatter and Gemma from Gemma Books, and it took us quite a long time to get through Ninth House. It is a bit of a beast. I was really disappointed by this book because it sounded so good and it sounded like just exactly my cup of tea, mysterious, fantasy elements, but not super fantasy elements, secret societies, dark academia. It really did sound on paper like I would like this. And in the early chapters, I actually thought this is going to be really interesting. And there were points in the book where it was really exciting. Unfortunately, I would say that the rest of the book really suffered with its pacing. The pacing was just not good at all, and there was a lot in this that I feel probably could have been edited out or just edited a little bit better to make the pacing work. And unfortunately for me, the ending was also extremely unsatisfactory. I don't want to spoiler this here as to why that was, so I won't, but yeah, I don't think I want to pick up the second book in the duology. I did quite like the character, Alex Stern, who's the main character of this, but there were also a lot of things that were putting me off. I thought the setup was good and I thought her backstory was really interesting, but then just the execution fell a bit short on this. I think it had a lot of potential, a lot of promise. I didn't really ever get past just thinking that this was fine. There were definitely times earlier on in the book where I thought I would definitely be reading the sequel, but by the end I was just really tired of this. So yeah, it was a good book, it was fine, but I don't think I want any more of it. So yeah, that was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I also read from my giant TBR, Road to Nowhere by Christopher Pike, and this one was one of the 4 Christopher Pikes that I hauled in February, and I'd never read this one before, but unfortunately I did watch an adaptation of this that featured in The Midnight Club. I did make a video all about the TV series The Midnight Club and Christopher Pike, so if you haven't seen that, you can go and check it out. I'll link it in the description down below. But this was one of these stories that was adapted as a story that the people at The Midnight Club told, and because I had watched that adaptation, I did know the big plot reveal of this book, and I think this would be an amazing book if the plot reveal was a surprise. The plot reveal wasn't a surprise because I'd spoiled it for myself. I think this is a good book. I think Christopher Pike deals with a lot more hard-hitting issues than people give him credit for, because these are kind of classed as like teen books, which really dates me because it was kind of before YA was a thing. But yeah, if I'd have read this in my Christopher Pike phase in my teenage years, I definitely would have lapped this up. And yeah, it did nothing wrong, but I had spoiled it for myself, so it will remain in the good category. Next up, Aurora Teagarden. This month's book for the Into the Library read-along, hosted by Ange's Book Chatter and Booktube with Amy, was A Fool and His Honey. And A Fool and His Honey is the 6th book in the Aurora Teagarden series. We're reading one of these books per month until they're finished with the Into the Library read-along. I had never read A Fool and His Honey before, but it was probably one of my favourites of the Aurora Teagarden series so far. As always, there are problems and flaws with Aurora's character. She does get irritating, she really does grate on me at times, and there were some moments in this book where she is just it just seemed very implausible that she was so incapable of doing some of the things that she seemed incapable of in this book. But it really improved. The mystery element of this one was much better than the mystery elements in some of the previous, and this one, in fact, it did genuinely feel mysterious to me. I genuinely felt like there was a mystery to be solved, and it didn't just wrap up very suddenly. Definitely better than the rest of the series so far. Something really that I was hoping for happened in this one, so looking forward to the next one, which I forgot to talk about in my TBR video, but it's called Last Seen Alive, and it's the 7th book, so I'll be reading that in July sometime, once I get finished with the books that I've still got on the go. Still in the good category, I have Two books that I've had to go back to the library. First of all, The Power by Naomi Alderman. I read this because it won the Women's Prize back in, I think it was 2017, and I wanted to read this because Naomi Alderman was going to be talking about it at the Women's Prize Live, and I was glad I had read it, and I went to that talk. It was very, very interesting and very entertaining. I definitely will watch the series of The Power as well. My thoughts on the book really are that this was another book where it has so many things to hook me in. I really liked the idea of it being a bit dystopian. I really liked the idea that it was about what would happen if women got power, but they got power by having electrical powers. Really interesting sci-fi concept. I really liked the way the author went about doing this. Yeah, I'm not going to spoil her how she does it, but I really liked the structure, the way that she'd thought that through. But I didn't really engage with any of the characters in this. There were, I think, 4 different perspectives, and I didn't really care for any of them, to be honest. I don't necessarily think you were meant to be on board with the characters or care about them. They were interesting, but because there was nobody who I was really rooting for, this wasn't like a really, really excellent read for me. But I did really enjoy it. We are getting towards very good books now, and I did really enjoy The Power, and I will definitely watch the TV series. It wasn't pushed over the edge into books that I really, really liked, because I was a little bit disappointed with the way it was carried out compared to what I thought it was. Still a great book. The other one that I've taken back to the library was Black Butterflies by Priscilla Morris. This was the final book that I read for the Women's Prize for Fiction read along, and the final book that I read on the long list and the short list, and it seems like a really, really long time ago now, because I finished that first this month. In finishing it, I finished reading all of the books that were on the long list this year. I've never done that before or attempted to do that before. I probably won't attempt to do it again, but I was proud of myself that I read all 16 books in full without DNFing any. Black Butterflies I read as a buddy read with my mum. It was the first sort of official buddy read we've done, and talked about the book. I wouldn't say that either of us were a massive fan of this book. I was interested in what it did and what it had to say about the time period, and it's set during like the early days of the war in Bosnia in 1992. And my main problem with this book, again, nearly every book that I've had any kind of problem with this month came down to the characters. I didn't like Zora, the main character who we were following. She was an artist. Her husband and her mum end up going to the UK to stay with her daughter when war is about to break out, and she insists on staying in Sarajevo and ends up sort of stuck there. It follows her throughout each season of 1 year, and I thought it was interesting. I thought it was well written. I thought it was really, really powerful in places. There was a bit which gives the book its name, Black Butterflies, which I thought was very emotional, and there are other emotional events in it that did really pull on my heartstrings, but I just didn't feel that connected to it, sadly. So it wasn't one of my least favourite books I read for the Women's Prize, but it wasn't one of my most either. It was just sort of in that middle ground of fine. I would definitely check out another book by this author when she comes to write one. So the last book in my good category before we get on to very good, and I did debate putting this into very good, but I'm being stingy. So this was The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont, and it is a beautiful copy. If you've not read The Christie Affair, it's been a massive book in the last year or so. This basically takes inspiration from Agatha Christie's 11-Day Disappearance in 1926. But this is a work of fiction, and I must just say first that if you are not like a massive fan of Agatha Christie like I am, a lot of the things that bothered me about the book probably won't bother you, and you probably would think this is a really, really good book. I did think it was a good book. I had an enjoyable time with this, but I had an enjoyable time with it because I was able to suspend my disbelief. So I had to think to myself right at the beginning of the book, from the outset, right, I'm going to put aside everything. I'm not going to judge it on the facts of what I already know about Christie, because I know that if I do that, I won't like the book. There are definitely elements to this that may annoy Agatha Christie fans who, like, especially Agatha Christie fans who know stuff about like the autobiographical side of Agatha Christie. Obviously the disappearance is something that nobody really knows that much about. Christie didn't really speak about it in her lifetime. It was a very, very difficult time in her life, and this book kind of takes that and runs with a completely different storyline. This is told by a woman who is having an affair with Agatha Christie's husband, Archie, and that did really happen. However, this is a fictional character. The fictional character, Nan, is telling this story, and there were elements that made me smile that were sort of Agatha Christie Easter eggs, nods towards her books. They were well done. If you took Agatha Christie out of this story, it is an interesting story. A little bit convoluted, but interesting nonetheless. And yeah, I didn't dislike this, which could easily have happened if I'd have taken it too seriously. It's not a favourite. I wouldn't mind reading other books that try to explain Agatha Christie's disappearance in fiction. I'm glad I read it, and it was probably a bit better than good, but yeah, I had to suspend all of my disbelief basically. But that was fine. So in the very good category, I only have 2 books this month, and the first one is poetry, and that was Crow by Ted Hughes, which I was kindly given by Charlie from Charlie Brooke Reads. And this is a poetry collection by Ted Hughes about Crow, and it's very, very dark indeed, and I can't pretend that I actually understood everything that was going on in these poems, but I did really enjoy it. I enjoyed reading this. I would be interested to read some of Ted Hughes' other work to see how it changed or was different in other collections. And I was interested in what I read about the time at which this was written. Yeah, I thought there was some excellent poetry in here. I would absolutely read it again or dip into it again, so I'm going to keep this one. Yeah, it was nice to be reading some poetry again. I think I am a bit out of practice with poetry, especially poetry that sort of has as many layers as this one does. Although I didn't fully understand it, it was still a comfortable 4-star book. Really did have a good short amount of time with Crow. And my other firmly 4-star read of the month that was also very good was Birdman by Mo Hader. I buddy read this with Ollie from Criminolly. I think we both really enjoyed this book. I believe Ollie has actually done a review of this one, which I need to check out because I've been away and missed pretty much everything on BookTube. Birdman is very much a police procedural crime thriller sort of book, and I haven't read a really good, juicy police procedural for quite a long time. This is the first book in the Jack Caffrey series, and I would really like to read the rest of this series. The other book I have on my shelf, which is also about Jack Caffrey, I think is book 4, so I am going to be looking out for books 2 and 3 before I get to that one, because I think this would be good to read in order. I was told before reading this it's a very, very disturbing book, and I definitely would say to other people who might read it, approach it with caution. I wouldn't say Ollie or I were particularly very, very disturbed by this, but it was absolutely horrific in places. All the stuff about the killer is very, very, very dark and twisted and absolutely disgusting. But as I've said in videos before, I am not a person who's particularly triggered by books. There was actually a part in this book, and this has never happened to me before, where I think it was actually a jump scare. I actually was really, really scared, and I hadn't been scared in the rest of the book, but it was like a jump scare in a film. I have never experienced that feeling, or if I have, I've forgotten it. I don't think I've experienced that for a very, very long time in a book, if ever. I think this is a really well put together crime book, but it is very much hard hitting and dark and on the disturbing side, I would say. So it's a well plotted police procedural. It kept you guessing, it kept you reading, and Although it's a bit of a trope, I did really like the flawed detective main character, and I would want to read more about him, so I will at some point. Now my last two books, one is non-fiction and one was an audiobook, and I'm going to start with the non-fiction. I now own my own copy of this, but when I read it, it was a library book. This is How Not to Be Strong by Alex Scott, and I met Alex Scott at the Women's Prize Day and she signed this book for me, and I listened to her talk and I thought she was really, really inspirational. Now before I read How Not to Be Strong, I thought Alex Scott was a really inspirational woman, but reading this book I was inspired all over again because she is just an incredible lady. I admire so much the things that she has done for women's football and for women in the media, in the world of sports media, because she has raised the profile of women's football so much. And I really do feel that women like Alex Scott are part of a generation of women footballers without whom the Lionesses would definitely not have built to the point where they were able to win the Euros last summer. Alex talks very humbly about all her incredible achievements in this book. She talks about a very difficult and abusive childhood, and was very, very sad in places, very, very hard hitting. And I loved the way this was both about being a strong woman and about how not to be strong. So Alex talks a lot about mental health in this book and her own mental health, and recognising what has worked for her in helping her with her mental health. And I just respect Alex Scott even more for hearing about things that she's been up against, things that have been difficult in her life, and things that she has come through and still being the inspiring woman she is today. Without gushing too much, when we saw her talking at the Women's Prize, she was asked how she would want to be remembered, and bearing in mind this is a woman who won many things in women's football, had so many firsts, like the first woman to be on Match of the Day as a pundit, all sorts of things like that. And her answer was that she wanted to be remembered for her kindness, and I just think that she was such a lovely, humble person who I admire a lot. So loved this book, 5 stars, will definitely read it again at some point. Brilliant. My final book was an audiobook. My favourite book of the month was Before They Are Hanged by Jo Abercrombie. This is the second book in the first Law series by Jo Abercrombie, and I buddy listened to it with Gemma from Gemma Books and Jack from Spread Bookjoy, and we're going to be going straight on to listening to the third one, Last Argument of Kings, because it was just so good. Now, in contrast to the other books this month, and probably why I had such a problem with characters in other books, is that the characters in Jo Abercrombie are just incredible. The narration on the audiobook is just incredible. You really believe that you are following all of these characters and you really believe in them, even though this is in a fantasy world. So yeah, this is a fantasy that I really love and have been enjoying, and yeah, I can't wait to see what happens to these characters. So at the end of book 1, I would definitely have told you that Inquisitor Glockter was my favourite character and favourite villain. He's definitely one of my favourite villains of all time. He is brilliant. And now at the end of book 2, I would absolutely tell you that my 2 favourite characters now are Logan and Ferro. I think they are a brilliant combination together. And I absolutely loved also the growth storyline of sort of the third main character from the first book, Giselle, who I didn't really have a connection to before, but I really started to feel for him more in this book. And this book ended in such a way as to sort of stand alone, but to sort of make you definitely want more. Lots of developments in the plot, which I won't talk about at risk of spoiling the first 2 books. If you like fantasy and you haven't tried Jo Abercrombie's first Law series yet, I am almost a convert to fantasy just because of this series. I think it's very, very good. That was my absolute favourite book of the month. Really, really enjoyed listening to it and can't wait to listen to the third book. That's all of the things that I read in the month of June. I'm sure you're all thinking, right, what has happened to the giant TBR? We saw a haul video in the middle of the month. It's been my birthday. What has happened to the giant TBR? So at the end of May, when we checked in with the giant TBR, the numbers were 163 unread books on my giant TBR. I then hauled 2 books at the Women's Prize Live that I haven't read before, and that took me up to 165 books. In my unboxing video with the Crime Syndicate book, I hauled 2 additional books as well as the Crime Syndicate book, so that brought us up to 168 books. I then had 6 birthday present books on my birthday, and that took us up to 174 books. I then went out and bought 3 books on my birthday, or my husband treated me to them for my birthday, so that brought us up to 177. But saving the day of the 177 books, I did DNF 2 books. And I am going to be unhauling, which I've mentioned in my previous video, all of my Patricia Cornwall books, 5 of which are unread. So that takes 7 books in total off the giant TBR, which brings us back down to 170 books. And as I've said, I read 4 books from the giant TBR in the month of June. They were The Christie Affair, Road to Nowhere, Birdman, and Crow. And that means that the giant TBR is now standing at 166 books. I am absolutely astonished that after hauling that amount of books, I have managed to only grow my TBR by 3 books. I know it's gone up, but I think that's pretty good for a birthday month, so not too unhappy with that. And also, thank goodness I tried to read Blowfly and decided to unhaul all of the Scarpetta books, because otherwise we could have had a TBR disaster. That's all from me for this end of June wrap up. I hope you all had a lovely reading month in June and got lots of lovely books read. Do let me know in the comments what were your favourite books of June, or let me know your least favourites, or any books that you DNF'd if you want to. I would love to chat to you, so do let me know how you got on with reading in June. If you have enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will look forward very much to seeing you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now. That's a good boy. You're going to be in the video, Harry. You're going to be on the channel. You're going to be in this one. That's a good boy. Good boy. Are you doing the channel today? Are you doing the channel? Yeah? No?